Welcome to the Brookshire Brothers Hazard Communication Standard and Safety Data Sheet Training. Let's get started. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, regulates chemicals in the workplace to the Hazard Communication Standard. The standard has recently been revised, and beginning on June 1, 2015, manufacturers and importers of chemicals will be required to comply with the new labeling and safety data sheet requirements. Safety data sheets, or SDS, were formerly called Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDS. Because the new labels and safety data sheet are already available for some chemicals, this training is needed so you will be able to read and interpret the information on the new labels and SDSs. All container labels should display minimal mandatory information. Now, let's take a look at the new labeling requirements. The product identifier identifies the product and may possibly have the product name, code number, or batch number. These must be identical to the corresponding SDS safety data sheet. Container labels will also have the standardized signal words that are used to indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard. There are two signal words, danger and warning. Danger is used for more severe hazards, and warning is used for less severe hazards. Every label will display one of these hazards. The hazard statement is a short statement that describes the nature of the hazards of the chemicals, including, where appropriate, the degree of hazard. Some examples might include causes damage to kidneys through prolonged or repeated exposure when absorbed through the skin, or highly flammable liquid and vapor. Precautionary statements are phrases that list measures that should be taken to minimize exposure to hazardous chemicals, or to minimize improper storage or handling of a hazardous chemical. An example might include keep away from heat, flames, and sparks. No smoking. Pictograms appear in small red boxes to help quickly identify the specific hazard or hazards associated with the product. OSHA has designated 8 pictograms to depict distinct hazards that will be displayed, whereas more complex product may have multiple pictograms to appear on the label. Let's take a look at each one in detail. This pictogram identifies chemicals and products which can lead to chronic, which means slow developing or sometimes acute health problems. The flame pictogram is associated with products that are flammable or combustible. It also appears on the label of pyromorphic materials, self-heating materials, materials that emit flammable gases, self-reactive materials, or organic peroxides. The pictogram shown here of a cylinder identifies compressed gases, which can present various safety hazards. This pictogram is specific to certain types of chemicals, such as acids, that have a corrosive effect on the eyes, skins, and membranes. Another thing to remember is that some highly corrosive materials can cause metal containers to corrode and erupt. Products bearing this pictogram are capable of exploding. It is vitally important to pay attention to the precautionary statements that appear on the container label. A flame over an O represents products that are oxidizers. Oxidizers are gases such as oxygen, fluorine, and chlorine, which can cause any combustible material, like wood or gasoline, to burn much more rapidly or intensely than normal. This identifies acute and potentially fatal toxicity hazards. Chemicals that bear this pictogram may be highly poisonous or fatal if swallowed, if contact is made with the skin, or if it is inhaled. This pictogram represents the lower end of the scale for specific hazards, when it is compared to the products bearing some of the other pictograms. Each chemical approved for use has a corresponding safety data sheet, or SDS. Let's go over the key sections that make up the new safety data sheets. Identification. This includes the name of the product, as well as its common chemical name. This section also identifies the manufacturer, their emergency contact information, and the recommendations or restrictions for the product's use. Hazard identification. This section identifies all hazards of the chemical, and the appropriate warning information associated with those hazards. Information that appears on the container label also appears in this section, including signal word, hazard statements, precautionary statements, and pictograms. Composition information on ingredients. Here you'll find the name of each hazardous chemical present in the product, along with any unique identifiers, such as the Chemical Abstract Service CAS number. First aid measures. This section describes the initial care that should be given by untrained responders to an individual who has been exposed to the chemical. Firefighting measures. This will provide recommendations for extinguishing a fire involving the chemical. Accidental release measures. This section provides recommendations on the appropriate response to spills, leaks, or release of the chemical. Handling and storage. This gives a list of precautions for safe handling practices and conditions for safe storage of the chemical. Exposure controls, personal protection. This section provides exposure limits, engineering controls such as ventilation systems, and personal protective measures that can be used to minimize worker exposure. Physical and chemical properties. This section lists the chemical's characteristics, including but not limited to appearance, odor, flash point, and pH. Stability and reactivity. This section discusses whether the chemical is stable or unstable under normal conditions while in storage or while being handled. Toxicological information. Here you can see the toxicological and health effects, if any, of overexposure to the chemical. Also, information about known or likely types of exposure, such as inhalation, ingestion, or eye contact, will be in this section. Other information indicates when the SDS was prepared or when the last known revision was made. We have now reviewed the new label and SDS requirements of the new Hazardous Communication Standard. One thing that has not changed at our retail locations is that you still may look up the SDS for any chemical used at the store at any time during working hours. Also, a written copy of the Hazard Communication Plan is located in the front of the SDS book and is available for review by all employees. Department managers and supervisors are responsible for training employees in the respective departments on the physical and health hazards of specific chemicals, as well as the measures employees should take to protect themselves from these hazards, including the use of personal protective equipment such as protective eyewear or rubber gloves. If you have any questions about the material presented in this training module, make sure to ask your supervisor at this time.